I got the invitation to go on this Armed Lutheran radio show, though. You know this guy? Have you seen this? There's two things that I would like to say that make me feel safe. Number one, the fact that there is a radio show called the Armed Lutheran Podcast somewhere in the world. That makes me feel safe.
Pistols, prayer, and potluck. This is Armed Lutheran Radio.
Hey folks, welcome to Armed Lutheran Radio, a show about guns, hunting, competitive shooting, the natural right of self-defense, and what God's Word says about the issues surrounding gun rights and gun ownership. I'm your host, Lloyd Bailey, the Armed Lutheran, and this is episode number 398. Thank you so much for making Armed Lutheran Radio a part of your week again this week. Welcome aboard for those of you who are new. Glad to have you here. Pastor John Bennett will be joining us in just a moment. Before we do get started, I do want to mention a couple of things. One, the new book, Forsaking All Others, is out. It came out on the 31st, or no, it came out on the 6th. I misspoke there. It came out on the 6th, and it is available in paperback. Signed copies are available at the website, armedlutheran.us/books. We also have a bundle with both of the books in the series available for a 10% discount. Both the books, of course, will be signed while supplies last, and there is a copy, and copies are available at Amazon.com as well. Just check out armedlutheran.us/books for the details. Also want to remind everyone that we are listener funded. We don't have any advertising. We don't have any sponsors. We rely on the generosity of the good people who are members of the Reformation Gun Club. People like Edwin from Round Lake Beach, Illinois, Dan from Enumclaw, Washington, Frank from Lake City, Michigan, Catherine from Casper, Wyoming, Paul from Sheridan, Wyoming, Curtis from Junction City, Kansas, Jim from Fort Wayne, Indiana, Mitch from Stockbridge, Michigan, Ron from Lexington Park, Maryland, and William from Bentonville, Arkansas. Thank you all for your support, and thank you to all of the members of the Reformation Gun Club. Folks, if you would like to join them, if you would like to come and support the show, get access to hundreds of hours of exclusive content, some cool Armed Lutheran swag, and invitations to our monthly online hangouts, visit reformationgunclub.com. Sign up today for just $36 a year, and we would love to have you come and join us, and look forward to seeing all the members at our April online hangout here in a couple of weeks. All right, so Pastor John Bennett, the pistol packing padre, is with us. Welcome back, Pastor.
Thank you, Lloyd. It's been a while.
It has, and you've had your own sort of Holy Week ordeal.
Well, I mean, in all fairness, what Jesus went through was significantly worse, but...
Exactly. I'm glad you're on the mend, and glad things are improving, and it's awesome to get back together with you.
Yes, it is.
So today, what I thought we'd do is something very weird. We don't normally talk about those cackling hags on The View, but something happened this week that I thought would be worth talking about. And part of the reason that we don't talk about The View is because it's generally not good for your mental health.
It destroys brain cells. But you can learn a lot of interesting things. You know, for example, global warming causes cicadas and earthquakes and solar eclipses.
And solar eclipses, yes.
I tell you.
You can fit the IQ of the entire bunch in a thimble. So it's
and
generally
have room
not
to spare.
This is very true. But the ladies, and I use that term loosely, they decided to discuss President Trump's announcement of his position with regards to abortion, which, if you missed it, was he announced earlier in the week it's a pragmatic political position, but it is not a moral one.
Unfortunately, yeah.
But Speaking of moral scions, Whoopi Goldberg in their discussion on The View of President Trump's abortion policy announcement decided to bring up the 10 Commandments, and that brought up naturally a discussion of the Fifth Commandment and war and guns. So this is tangentially related to the gun debate, but so I thought we would give a listen and react to what she and the others on this show had to say. So let me see if I can share.
And it's not mentioned in the Big Ten. I'm just going to say.
No.
In the Big Ten, it is not mentioned.
The commandments?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because I figured God was pretty clear. Here's the stuff that'll make your life better on earth.
All right, I want to stop right there. 15 seconds in. This goes for close to a minute. Before we get to address that obvious fallacy about abortion not being mentioned in the 10 Commandments, I want to address that last point first that most people may have glossed over. This idea that God is clear about the things, as she says, the stuff that will make your life better on earth. And what she says is true to an extent about, lying, as you'll hear in a minute, lying and adultery and that sort of thing. Not doing those things will make your life better on earth. But that wasn't the ultimate point of the commandments, was it?
No, it was about keeping yourself righteous in the eyes of God and about maintaining your relationship with the God who has created you. It was, and you look at the context in which the 10 Commandments are given, and this was given to God's covenant people, and it's to say it's supposed to make your life better on earth. Now, not that it's not true that following the 10 Commandments doesn't make your life, is going to make your life better. It's true. Because if you're not cheating on your wife and keeping the 6th commandment, you're going to have a better relationship with your wife. If you're not stealing from your neighbor is going to be a little more likely to look out for you when you're in need and so forth. So yes, but that's not the purpose for the 10 Commandments. Right. It's to keep us in line with God's will for us.
And I figured that was mentioned so obliquely. It jumped out at me, but most viewers might have just skipped right over it. And I guess because we are, looking at this thing, stopping it and analyzing every sentence, that part of it just happened to jump out at me. All right, so let's address that idea that something is not mentioned in the 10 Commandments, therefore it's not forbidden. Now, there's a lot of things not mentioned specifically in the commandments. And our Lutheran listeners will understand this, but for our non-Lutheran listeners, explain how we should look at the commandments and what those commandments actually mean beyond just the specific prohibitions.
Right. Yeah, if you look at, and of course, no, Luther isn't a writer of the scriptures. He is a teacher of the scriptures. And in the small catechism, and of course, to a much more lengthy extent in the large catechism, he shows that the 10 Commandments isn't simply about what you should not be doing, but what you should as well be doing in place of committing sin. You look at the explanation for each of the commandments, and it says, here's what you shouldn't be doing, but here's what you should be doing instead. You shall have no other gods before me. You should fear, love, and trust in God above all things is the explanation in the small catechism. So we often tend to think of them in a negative way according to our human nature that, well, this is what God is telling us what we can't be doing. He's a fun hater. He's a little dictator who is trying to dictate to us, what we cannot do. But ultimately it's about, and Jesus summarizes this in the Gospels, it's about loving the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and strength, and loving your neighbor as yourself. And these 10 Commandments give us a guideline, if you will, of how we ought to be loving our God, how we ought to be loving our neighbor. But to say that because something isn't in the Big Ten, as she puts it, which might confuse a lot of
especially since
fans,
there's 11 teams in the Big Ten now.
When she says, I guess they don't have any mathletes in collegiate football these days. I don't know. So let's take that to its logical conclusion. She's trying to justify abortion because it's not listed specifically in the 10 Commandments. Well, in the 10 Commandments, it doesn't specifically say that you cannot beat your wife when she gets out of line. But I think God would frown upon that thing. You know, it doesn't specifically state that you cannot be a glutton, and so therefore gluttony is now acceptable, which is, it seems to be, if you look at the world around you, just go to your local Walmart. But suddenly, gluttony is okay now because it's not in the 10 Commandments, and neither is drunkenness. Well, I guess, why stop at one glass of whiskey? Maybe finish the whole dang bottle.
Right. That's where we get the body positivity movement and all the...
Although Lizzo now is talking about quitting music. So if I never had to see somebody posting an image of her on Facebook ever again, it wouldn't be soon enough.
Well, that would be a blessing to both our ears and our eyes if she gives...
Yes.
So to carry this a little further, so basically what, and you and I have talked about this many times on the show. So when we're talking about murder or killing, that not only covers you shouldn't kill your neighbor, but you also should help and defend them when possible. And we've talked about that many times. Adultery, you shouldn't just cheat. Not only should you not cheat on your wife, but you should also not encourage your friends to do the same. Right.
Well, and Jesus even puts it to the point of, if you look at a woman lustfully, you're committing adultery in your heart.
Right.
If we were to take that seriously, then perhaps we should be passing decency laws about what young women are wearing in public these days.
Right.
When I can see every contour of what lies below your waist as you're walking down the street, that's going to tempt men to think lustful thoughts, and you are causing men to sin. Let's just call it for what it is. I know the feminist movement will call me a sexist, but I don't give a damn. So
that insult has lost all meaning at this point.
Yeah. But if you look at the Old Testament scriptures, and I'm not talking about ceremonial law because Christ fulfilled that. I'm talking about moral law, that there are, if you read through the book of Leviticus in particular, and there's also a lot of commentary on the law in Deuteronomy as well. But, there are laws about if a man strikes a pregnant woman and causes her baby to be born and that baby dies, he is guilty of the death of that baby. If there's a miscarriage or a stillbirth as a result of some sort of physical assault, that the law states that man is guilty of death and should be killed. You have passages that talk about, if you're walking, and Jesus talks about this as well in one of the times that he's ripping on the Pharisees to their face. But, if your neighbor's ox or donkey falls into a pit, that you're to help him get them out, that you're required to even come and render aid for the life of your neighbor's livestock. And that's a Fifth Commandment issue. If that livestock happens to perish, that's also threatens the livelihood of your neighbor. So there's plenty of laws that aren't specifically in the Decalogue, but are explicitly stated in Scripture as being moral laws. And to simply say that these no longer apply because it's not in the 10 Commandments, you're basically using the Scriptures to pick and choose what you like, to have a God that fits in a box for you so that you can feel justified doing whatever the heck you want to do. Which shouldn't be any surprise with Karen Johnson, which happens to be Whoopi's real name. Imagine that. Her name is Karen.
It is fitting.
Yes, it is. This is a woman who has boldly, proudly proclaimed that she's had 7 abortions. How much of this is her trying to justify her own wickedness to appease her own guilt?
In the next clip, they get focused on the 5th, and this is where I think things get particularly interesting. So let's listen in.
Here's the thing. Don't lie, because you don't want people lying to you. Don't mess with somebody's wife, because you're going to be mad if they're messing with yours. Just, common sense stuff.
Would say, thou shalt not kill.
They believe that. Yes, well, here's the thing.
So for those of you listening at home, it was Sunny Hostin, she of the eclipse and climate change nonsense, points out that evangelicals, she says, would bring up the 5th commandment, thou shalt not kill. So before we move on to Whoopi's theological genius on the 5th commandment, let's discuss this a little bit. What is the 5th commandment? For those of you who are these rascally evangelicals, that would be the 6th commandment
right.
in your Decalogue. What is the 5th commandment? What does it mean?
It's and she says, you shall not kill. The more correct interpretation or translation, I should say, is you shall not murder. That it specifically addresses willful harm of another without any justification, no pretense of self-protection or self-defense, that this is just straight up cold-blooded harm to another for no reason.
Okay, so the unlawful killing or harming of another person.
Correct.
Okay, so what do the original text say? Where do we get this idea? Why is kill so often the word that is used here?
It was a less than accurate translation in the original King James Bible. Give me a second. I'll just look up the word in Hebrew. Exodus chapter 20 is where we find the giving of the 10 commandments. So looking at Exodus chapter 20 in the Hebrew text, the word that is translated as kill in the King James, as murder in most other English translations, is ratzach, which means to murder or slay with premeditation. So this is just basic cold-blooded murder. Now, of course, Luther in his explanation extrapolates this to include physically harming your neighbor. This, you can't use this to, for example, try and condemn capital punishment, because if you look at both in Romans as well as I believe it's 1 Peter, that you have authority given to the government to carry out the sword against the wicked.
All right. Well, hang on a second before we get to that.
Sure.
I want to play the next. I think we have about 30 seconds left.
Okay.
They do bring up some ways in which we currently kill, and they use that as a rationale for why, because these different kinds of killing are acceptable, that abortion must be as well. So let's play that, and then let's address each of their points, quote unquote, individually.
I think thou shalt not kill cannot be used as the block, because we allow wars all the time.
Yes, we do.
The Crusades
we allow the death penalty.
Were about all these things.
We allow guns.
Yes. So there is some conversation to be had here. So you can thou shalt not kill for everybody.
Yes.
And everything. Or we have to talk about.
Okay. So that's a lot of stupid to unpack. So let's see what we can do with this. I'm going to need a beer for this. One moment. Okay. So, as we discussed, it actually means murder. It's the unlawful killing or harming of another person, not killing in general. So let's take these examples that they've thrown out one at a time. And I want you to respond to each one and explain where they've gone wrong. So first of all, they mention war. You can't apply the Fifth Commandment because we allow war. And she mentions, for example, the Crusades.
Yeah, if you look at, and this is where a perfect example is found in the Old Testament with the conquest for the Holy Land. God commanded the Jewish people, his chosen people Israel, to slaughter a whole lot of people. And this was an act of war against ungodly nations. So if you say that the Fifth Commandment also includes a prohibition against war, then God contradicts himself. He's no longer perfect God, and you have no chance of salvation because God is in fact evil if he justifies murder. So the Fifth Commandment cannot apply to war. Now, I would say that the Fifth Commandment applies to war in the event that the war is unjust and targets the innocent.
That's where I was going to go next. What is just war theory, and where does that concept come from?
Just war theory, there are a lot of sources for that going back to antiquity. Augustine wrote about it, Luther wrote about it, but in essence, just war is when the purpose of the war or the outcome of that war seeks to accomplish is for a righteous purpose. So, for example, you had the 30 Years' War where the Roman Catholic Empire tried to completely destroy the Reformation and those who had embraced the teachings of Luther. And in essence, it was a just war on behalf of the Lutherans who were fighting in those wars, because they were trying to free themselves from the tyranny of the papacy that sought to destroy them. You had the Smalcaldic Wars as well. Same thing. I don't remember what episode it was. This is going back probably 2-3 years, but we talked about the Magdeburg Confession.
Right.
Where the city of Magdeburg was basically under siege by the Roman Empire, by the papacy in essence, and they fought back. So those are just, I guess, some examples for what a just war is, but it's
World War II, for example, or that's probably the best example from modern warfare.
Yes and no.
I mean, from the Allied.
Oh, sure.
Side
I mean, you can get into all the philosophical arguments about it. If the purpose of our entrance into the war was to destroy the Axis forces because they were evil and were taking innocent life, then yes. This begs the question, if wars that are entered into for political reasons, can those be just wars? And I think World War II is a good example because in general, the population of the United States was supportive of entering into that war because they saw what was happening to the Jewish people, despite the fact that the New York Times tried to hide it. So,
right, they saw the Nazis overrunning Europe. They saw the Japanese overrunning the Pacific and bombing our base at Pearl Harbor, and all of the death and destruction that resulted. So just like you can't apply kill in broad strokes, the prohibition against killing in broad strokes, you can't apply war and say, well, we allow war. War's okay. It's not always okay.
Right.
It's killing in certain instances. It's war in certain instances, and it's based on the morality of the killing, the morality of the war.
Right. Yeah, and it's, I think a good way to look at this too is if we take a current example, if the United States was to enter into the war presently being fought in Ukraine, that would be an unjust war, because then you are taking sides between two highly corrupt governments that are at war with one another. There is no American interest to be served there. And yes, you can maybe make the argument that well, what if we're protecting the innocent civilian lives of the Ukrainian people? But then at what extent? We're spilling the blood of our own sons and daughters to try and keep people who have been victimized by a corrupt government from their own people dying. So,
and you could apply this idea of just war to that conflict and say the Ukrainians, for example, are just in their prosecution of the war.
Yes.
The Russians are not.
Correct.
You look at the war in Gaza, the Israelis are absolutely just in their prosecution of the war against Hamas. Hamas is not.
Right.
To take the two most recent examples.
Right.
Now the next thing she mentions, so I want you to respond to this. You were alluding to this earlier. We can't apply the Fifth Commandment to abortion because we have the death penalty.
Well, here's a case where you have specific passages that give the government the authority to punish wickedness with the sword. So, and again, we have to understand it in the context that, Romans 13, that they are doing this for the good of the people, and they're doing this in a righteous manner. If the government is rounding up its citizens and putting them to death because they're considered political enemies, that would certainly not be a righteous or just use of that authority. That would be outright murder. That'd be a violation of the Fifth Commandment. But when it is done, for example, to punish a child rapist or to punish a mass murderer, then yes, it is just. And I don't think anybody expects Karen Johnson to be an expert on the scriptures. I'm going to keep calling her Karen Johnson because I think it would really irritate her if I was doing that to her face. But, well, I guess I'll call her Whoopi, takes less time. Anyway, I don't think anybody expects her to be a biblical scholar, but I'm going to read from Exodus chapter 21. And this is beginning with verse 22. When men strive together and hit a pregnant woman so that her children come out, but there is no harm, the one who hit her shall surely be fined, as the woman's husband shall impose on him. So this is just unintentionally harming a woman, okay? But if there is harm, then you shall pay life for life. So if the moral law that God set out for his people was that even if a man should unintentionally harm a pregnant woman and causes her child to die, that he shall pay with his life, how much more does this apply for those who intentionally take the life of a child in the womb? There's no way around it for Whoopi or for anyone else for that matter, that abortion is murder, and it's laid out plainly in God's word.
And you were also, to sort of hammer home the idea of the acceptability of the death penalty in terms of the Fifth Commandment. You were mentioning Romans, and we've talked about Romans many times before. Can you touch on that briefly as well?
Yeah, so in Romans 13, you have laid out these instructions that Paul gives. The part that I've always struggled with, and I think a lot of other theologians struggle with this too, is that Paul is writing to the people in Rome who were under the Roman government, who, the Roman government acted very wickedly towards Christians. Granted, when Paul's writing, there isn't persecution like would be seen a century later after he's writing. But he lays out that the purpose of the government is to act for the good of the people. But also in Romans 13, it specifically gives the authority to the government to wield the sword for the good of the people. So that if a person commits such a horrific act of wickedness that the only just punishment is to put them to death, then that is a just and righteous thing for the government to do.
All right, final point that they make, and I think it's back to crazy Sonny Hostin again, who throws out guns. We can't apply the Fifth Commandment we can't say you shall not kill because we have guns. Now, we've addressed this before, but I want to get your quick take on that one.
Well, what are guns? They are the modern equivalent of a spear, a dagger, a sword, whatever ancient instrument was used for defense or for acts of aggression and war. So to say that you cannot own a gun because the law says you shall not kill, or even to take the correct translation, you shall not murder. Well, what's the purpose of a firearm? I don't own a firearm so that I can kill somebody. That's not my intent. In fact, I hope and I pray that I never have to use one of my firearms in order to protect myself or my loved ones. But if I have to, I will.
Right.
And I think a lot of this is an obvious misunderstanding of the mentality of your average gun owner and Second Amendment advocate. We don't own firearms for the purpose of killing others. We own them for the purpose of safeguarding our own lives. They are seen as instruments for recreation, for competition, and for safeguarding the life of ourselves and others. You know,
right. And because they can be used to kill people, the idea that you shouldn't be able to own it because you can kill someone with it, is akin to suggesting that you can't have a car because you might hit somebody, or you can't have who was it joked about killing people with a weed whacker.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, you can kill people with pretty much anything.
Right.
It's not
right.
It's not the instrument that's the key. It's the heart of the person who's wielding whatever that instrument is. And they see guns and think the only thing that guns are good for is to kill people, therefore we should not have them. And therefore, the whole idea that, well, we allow guns, so we should allow abortion as well, is quite a stretch logically.
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. And it's intellectually dishonest at its core. You know, if we are to ban things because they have the capability of ending life, there's a whole lot of stuff we're going to have to get rid of.
Yeah.
You know, we're going to have to get rid of trans fats. We're going to have to get rid of excess salt. We're going to have to get rid of fast food. We're going to have to get rid of, the biggest killer of American people is heart disease, isn't it? So, hey, we're going to have to get rid of everything that's unhealthy for you.
Well, and that gets to the point that they're trying to make there at the end. They're suggesting, well, if you're not going to say you can't kill, period, then we have to have these discussions about all these different things. And and that's where you get into this idea. Well, okay, when it comes to guns, if we're going to ban a gun because it can be used to kill people, there's a whole a really bad line of thinking that can lead us to banning all kinds of stuff, like you were saying.
Yeah.
All right, back to the view thing, and this is I want to take a big sip for this one. Okay, went down the wrong way. Tried to get the sound effect. That was a bad idea. Okay, chicken or egg question for you. This came to mind as I was going through this. The reason that we keep misdefining the commandment is as kill. I know there's a historical basis for that because of the King James Bible. But do you think this is the reason that we know, though, because we have the ability to go back and look at the original source documents, we know that wasn't the case, that it wasn't kill, it was murder. Do you think the reason that we continue to misrepresent this is it intentional because it aligns with the left's opposition to war and death penalty and guns, or is this misdefinition the reason that leftists oppose those things? Or is it some of both? Is it a chicken and egg question, or is it sort of a mixed bag?
I don't know.
What do you think?
I don't know. I think part of it is that there's a lot of people that still have a lot of familiarity to the King James Version. And so that automatically is the language that comes to mind. But the cynic in me says that part of it too is because using that language suits the political ideology of the left.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. Okay, so we alluded to this earlier, and I wanted to touch on this last. Let's look at another commandment that Whoopi doesn't bring up, and that's the second commandment. And again, for you filthy evangelicals, that's the third in your reading. You shall not use the Lord's name in vain. Now, Puritans among us will think that that's like saying "Gee, damn it," or "OMG," or what they think that's what the second commandment is about. That's part of it, but that's really, I think, just a minor part. That what really it's about is using the Lord's name to do or to justify evil things. And I think that is what Whoopi has done here in this conversation about the commandments and abortion. She's trying to justify abortion using God's word.
Yes, and this is something, and I don't remember the context of this. I somehow got into a discussion with someone on social media, which never leads to anything good these days.
No.
But it was someone trying to use the Bible to justify the practice of abortion. And what they ended up doing was taking, and I think I've mentioned this on a previous episode, but it's been a long time. There is a passage in the law where it talks about that if a man suspects his woman of being unfaithful or his wife of being unfaithful, that she's going to drink this stuff, and if she is guilty of infidelity, it'll cause her thigh to fall away. It's the language that's given in the text, and the NIV translated that as it would cause her to miscarry, which is so far from what the original text says. And so they will try and pick and choose Bible passages out of particular translations that use language that suits their ideology.
There's a good book about that, by the way, that I think you contributed to.
Yes.
Shameless plug.
Yes.
Sorry.
But it's so much of this is, those who believe that there is a God and he has certain expectations of his people, when they know they are failing to meet to those expectations, they will do anything they can to justify their sin. And, for people like Whoopi, for others that want to try and make the claim that, well, the Bible doesn't specifically mention abortion, so it must be okay. Well, like I said, the Bible doesn't say that, specifically state that you can't abuse your wife if she's out of line. It doesn't lay that out word for word. So obviously that must be okay. So, in fact, maybe I'm not being a good husband unless I am beating my wife.
God, that sounds like a Steven Anderson sermon or something.
Oh, yes. Today on the fundamentalist theological train, we're going to get railroaded into these obtuse ideologies that are taken from bad interpretations. But so much of that is trying to justify their own sin. Well, the Bible doesn't specifically say that a man can't marry a man, so it must be okay. The Bible doesn't specifically say that a man can cut off his genitalia and pretend to be a woman, so it must be okay. Ultimately, it comes down to one thing. These people need Jesus.
Yeah, we all do. And yeah, the world needs him more than ever, I think, right now.
Yep.
All right. That's probably the best place we could end it.
I agree.
Well, Pastor, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. I really do appreciate it. It's been a lot of fun.
Yes, it has. Good to
Folks,
talk to you.
If you have any comments or any questions about anything you heard here, any complaints, please feel free to visit our feedback page at armedlutheran.us/feedback. leave us a voicemail or a voice message. We would love to hear from you and respond to your comments in a future episode, or if you have a suggestion for a topic that you would like to hear us discuss, please visit us next week. I have no clue what we're going to be doing. This weekend is another and the last of our season's volleyball weekends. So until then, keep shooting, keep praying. We'll talk to you next time.
For show notes, be sure to visit our website at www.armedlutheran.us. Check out the Facebook page, The Armed Lutheran, or join our Facebook group, Fans of Armed Lutheran Radio. If you like what you hear, please leave us a comment on our feedback page at armedlutheran.us/feedback, or a review on iTunes, and let us know what you think. Thank you for listening to Armed Lutheran Radio, a member of the Self-Defense Radio Network.